This is the PlagmanRules podcast, and we're back here for another episode. This one's going up a little later than usual today. I just had a pretty busy day today, so finally I get to sit down and talk about some stuff. So yeah, we're going to talk about three subjects today. The first one, probably going to take up most of the time today, and that's this whole Quentin Tarantino Manson Murders movie that's in development, kind of in the works right now. We're also going to take a look. We already have some news out of D23 about The Incredibles 2, so I'll briefly mention that. There's only so much we can say about it, because right now we don't know a whole hell of a lot about it. And the last thing we'll do, a War for the Planet of the Apes review. I went to see it last night, and I'll have a review here in a few minutes. Okay, so let's start with this. This is a really interesting story that's been coming up here this week. The initial reports were about Brad Pitt and Jennifer Lawrence. Now we have some reports about Margot Robbie being interested, Samuel L. Jackson. So here's the thing with me with this. I would love to see a movie about Charles Manson, about everything that happened with him. Everything that happened with him outside of Sharon Tate, everything including the murder of Sharon Tate, everything post, and, all of his attempts to get out of prison, everything that happened where now he has been ruled out for the death penalty. You could even do 2 or 3 separate movies on that. His relationship with Roman Polanski, because he was the husband of Sharon Tate. And, Polanski's a whole nother story, you can do at a later time. But the last name, literally one of the last names, besides maybe Michael Bay, that I would have thought of who would do a movie about this kind of stuff is Quentin Tarantino. Because Tarantino does his own stuff. He does original projects. He does Inglourious Bastards and Pulp Fiction. All these very original, very Tarantino movies. It's like nobody makes a movie like he does. There are people who have tried since then. Not all of them have been successful. But here's the thing. Does Tarantino fit for this movie? And just from the limited information I have right now, I don't think so. I am very torn on this. Because Quentin Tarantino is a guy who I really like most of his movies. Pulp Fiction, I bounce between that and Inglourious Bastards as far as which one is my favorite of his movies. But, of course, one of the big things about Inglourious Bastards, how that movie ends. What they do with Hitler in that movie. Now, here's the thing. And a lot of people don't like that movie just because of that ending. Because they're like, no, that didn't happen. Hitler didn't get killed in the cinema. No, of course not, as far as we know. But here's the thing. We've seen how many hundreds of portrayals of Hitler in film. So I don't mind if one of those depictions is of him, being this guy and being the character that he is in the movie and ending up being killed in the cinema. That's fine. We've seen hundreds and hundreds of depictions of World War II in film. We might even be getting close to 1,000 by the time we get over with this year, because I think there's 2 or 3 coming up. So I'm fine with that. But here's the thing. Sharon Tate and the story of Charles Manson, there's never really been a big movie on that. At least not, that I can think of. There's been some documentaries on this. I know the basics of it, but I don't know every last detail. And I think a big budget movie like this would be a really great way for today's millennial audience who doesn't know who Sharon Tate is, who only know 1 or 2 things about Charles Manson, where they can really learn about that. But at the same time, now we get into this discussion of, if you do a movie like this, how accurate does it have to be? Now, I'm somebody who says, meet me in that gray area. There was another example here we can look at is Foxcatcher from a couple of years ago. That's another movie that people really despised once they figured out, and I say that in that way, because the movie came out, and then within a few months, we got like 3 or 4 really good documentaries. Like, one of them's on Netflix, one of them's a 30 for 30 I've seen. Both of them highlight some of the differences between what happened in the movie and what happened in real life. And all of a sudden, it felt like people who liked the movie at one point then saw these documentaries, or this more info came out, more interviews with the real people, the survivors of the story, and it's like, all of a sudden, people turned on the movie and said, well, it wasn't accurate at all, so I hate it now. I say, you know what? The movie, I actually just rewatched the movie a few weeks ago. It still holds up as a very tense film. Even though, yeah, it does border on tedious and a little boring sometimes. Once I got out of that box of not every last reel of film in this movie is true, I still found Steve Carell's performance was terrific. Mark Ruffalo was terrific. This is one of the better Channing Tatum performances we've ever seen. So I'm fine if Tarantino wants to do a version of Charles Manson that is not 100% absolutely true, because that's what documentaries are for. That's what books are for. We have to remember that a big budget feature film, it's not the end-all be-all of a true story. That's why they say based on a true story. That's why sometimes I really get upset when they say a true story, because if you take that to heart, that means every last thing that you see happened in real life. But when they say based on a true story, that means yeah, probably most of this happened. Or maybe part of this happened. And that's the thing. Another thing, too, you can never have a 100% historically accurate movie because very few movies are made that has, like footage we can use. Like if somebody wanted to, there's the whole OJ Simpson murder trial is on YouTube. You can pull up and you can watch. It probably equals out to like a few months worth of footage where if you wanted to, you can take the actual transcript of what happened in court and what happened outside of court as far as what was on camera and stuff, and you can make a screenplay out of that and make it 100% historically accurate. But that's kind of dull. You have to have some moments here and there to let the adaptation breathe and to let the filmmaker or the screenwriter breathe and do something that ultimately, fits into the story. So yeah, if Tarantino wants to do that, that's fine. But this is one of those things where Tarantino's style, I don't think matches a straight up biopic. So that has me a little worried. Is he going to take the death of Sharon Tate, not take it seriously? Because once you get into what happened with Sharon Tate and the fact that she was 8.5 months pregnant when she died. I have a relative right now who is, maybe by the time this goes up, she'll have had a baby born, but she's right at 9 months pregnant. That affects me personally. Just if he would take that and not do it seriously, I think that would really be distasteful. And I know now they've had some outcry from the Tate estate and her family that they don't want Tarantino to do this if he's going to do it in that same way of Inglourious Bastards where it becomes total fiction. And I don't think that that's deserving in this case at all. I think, yeah, that they have a point here. You don't want that whole thing to become just a Tarantino hoopla. You want a movie that represents, to some degree, not the nth degree, but you need some degree of accuracy there. So yeah, this is something where maybe in the next couple months we get some more details where Tarantino says, yes, I'm going to dial down a little bit on my style and take this as seriously as I can, but at the same time, throw in my own little twist and, little tricks here and there. Now, that version of the movie, I think, can work and can work very well. But at the same time, I think about it and I say, well, Tarantino, you make a Tarantino movie without the style of the Tarantino movie, that's, I don't know if I want to see that though. This is one of those movies that when it comes out, as long as they don't, scrap this whole idea, if it doesn't hit the perfect note, if it doesn't hit that perfect note of being a Tarantino movie, yet still being respectful to some degree to Charles Manson and to a big degree to Sharon Tate, then it'll be a failure in many people's eyes. And I don't know, there's not really, unless they did like an O.J. Simpson movie or a movie on the Monica Lewinsky scandal and everything, or if they did a movie on 9/11 or something, since it's so recent, we're talking, kind of some more recent stuff. And this, yeah, maybe is not as recent as those other examples. There's going to be some hate if this movie doesn't hit it right. And at the same time, there's going to be some disappointment from moviegoers and from people who love Tarantino films if this doesn't have at least some amount of the Tarantino vibe. And you know what? I think that's a fair point. I think we need to hit that perfect medium and do it, and I think Tarantino can do it. But with every amount of faith that I'm going to put in it, I'm going to match that with worry because this could turn out to be a disaster of a movie if it's done wrong. Okay, so here's one thing. He's got Brad Pitt and Jennifer Lawrence that he's had discussions with them. He's actually talked with them about stuff. And Jennifer Lawrence is not going to be up for the Sharon Tate role, which I say thank God. I don't think that's a fit for her at all. Any other role I think would fit for her. But I do not see her as Sharon Tate. I don't think, and not to say she can't pull it off, but I just don't see that as a good fit for her as an actress. And then Brad Pitt, we don't know what role he would play. I definitely don't think he'll do Charles Manson. Arguably, he's a little too old for that. Not to say he couldn't do it, but I don't see that as a fit. The one actress who's been listed here, who I think is the absolute perfect choice to play Sharon Tate, and she's met with Tarantino as well, Margot Robbie. She looks like Sharon Tate a little bit, enough to where she can pull it off, just in the looks department, and I think she has the acting chops to do it. Now, the other day I was rewatching Wolf of Wall Street. I realized even though she's in the movie less than I remember. But when she's on screen, she's more than just the hot-looking bimbo wife. She actually has great dramatic moments with DiCaprio. She holds her own against the screen. And, DiCaprio in that movie, it's such a big performance. Not just in screen time, but just with all the yelling and all the screaming and all the excess. Just everything. She's able to hold her own against DiCaprio with that performance. That's impressive. But this is a gal that I think can have 3 or 4 Oscar nominations in the next 10 to 15 years. And I think a role like this might be nomination number one if she doesn't have a movie coming up this year that I don't know about. Yeah, and I definitely think that she can pull this off. And then Samuel L. Jackson, who's been in just about every Tarantino movie. Samuel L. Jackson has always been around a Tarantino project, and most of the time he does very well. Like, I think his performance in Hateful Eight was one of his better roles and one of his better performances that he's had in a while. And I think he and Tarantino just have that vibe together. They have that connection, actor and director, that you sometimes get with like De Niro and Scorsese, or DiCaprio and Scorsese. And yeah, so I think that's a great pairing, and I'm interested to see what role he would take. Anyway, so yeah, this is one I'll be following it for the next, however many months until we get the film released. It'll probably be a little over a year, I would imagine. But I'm going to be interested to see it no matter what happens. And I think it's a story, it's about time we get something with Charles Manson, something with the murder of Sharon Tate, something, with that. And I think it's a great story to tell. And again, if they hit the right notes, if they can find that perfect blend, you could have a hell of a great movie. But at the same time, if it falls short in a big way, it could be a total flop. So we'll see. We'll see what happens. Okay, so next thing, we've got our first kind of big announcement out of D23, the convention that's going on this weekend. And it's The Incredibles 2. And I was thankful that we got some news on this at least. I know that maybe they showed them some footage, I don't know. And there is some, some stuff that's still under wraps, stuff that they're not going to be able to talk about yet. And at the time of this recording, we do not have any confirmation of whether a trailer has been shown or not. So maybe there has been one since, and we'll talk about that later if that does happen. But for now, we do have a little nugget of a story idea in here, and that is that John Lasseter says this movie picks up right where the first one leaves off. He says there's maybe that only a minute will have passed. So that means the Underminer is coming back. John Ratzenberger, who's of course in every Pixar movie, has a nice little voice part there. That was kind of one of his smaller roles. Maybe he'll finally get a nice big role here. The thing with The Incredibles 2, I don't care where you start it. I don't care where you end it. If they had started it, if this was in real time, if it was 13, 14 years later, I'm fine with that. If it's a minute later like this, I'm fine with that. Because either way, I think you're going to get a good story out of these. And plus, Brad Bird's coming back to direct it. He did, of course, animated for years, and he went over to live action. Now he's coming back to animation. And Brad Bird, I think, is a director who, if he wanted to, he could stay with live action. But given the choice to come back to animation, I think that means he really wants to do this. And I think he really wants to tell this story. And maybe he's got a great story that's really worth telling. Now, I know the track record on Pixar sequels has been, more often than not, they're going to be inferior to the first film. I mean, the Toy Story sequels are the exception there. So yeah, I think with The Incredibles 2, this is finally a sequel we're going to get that we're really anxious for, that everybody's excited about, that, there are now people who were kids when this first movie came out who are now going to be taking their kids to see the movie when it opens up. So, and to a degree when that happens, that means the box office usually bumps up a little bit there, because you have both a strong interest from kids, because I know a lot of kids who love The Incredibles who were not around when the first one opened because it's been advertised so much on TV and it gets syndicated so much on so many channels on basic cable. So yeah, the young kids know about it. The older kids who are now adults and maybe have kids now went to see it when it first came out or have seen it many times since. I think that's one where you're going to get a wide level of interest from everybody on this one. Yeah, the fact that it starts just a minute or two after the original, which means we're going to have, and they said there's going to be a big set piece with the superheroes taking on the Underminer. I think that's cool. And plus, it's always going to be cool to see what happens to these characters next. What happens as the kids mature? What happens as the adults get older? What, Jack, the baby, are we going to figure out more about his powers? What other powers does he have? Is he always going to be that demon baby? We'll figure all that out in just a little under a year. I'm very excited to hear this news here. But again, I would have been excited if they would have said it was set 14 years after the original, or somewhere in between. I'm just excited for this movie in general. Okay, so last thing we're going to do today, I went to see War for the Planet of the Apes last night, and here's my review. There's a moment in Dawn of the Planet of the Apes where Caesar and his son Blue Eyes have a conversation by sign language in which Blue Eyes apologizes for following the wrong group of apes. The music score during the scene, paired with a genuine look of sincerity that leaped off the screen from Blue Eyes, was one of the most emotional moments of the Planet of the Apes series in a long, long time. Probably since the traumatic ending of Escape from the Planet of the Apes. I'll warn you, War for the Planet of the Apes has the power to match or go even further with these type of emotional moments. Even though I didn't start weeping on this one, the screening I was in was occupied by only 20 people, but I heard sniffling all the way through the film, right up to the first note of the music score of the end credits. Now, as far as I felt about the film, well, after the finish of the final scene, I was asking myself, did Matt Reeves pull off the impossible? Did I just see a film that tops the original Planet of the Apes? Well, maybe through the course of this review, I'll have my answer. The plot picks up a couple of years after the events of Dawn in a semi-cheesy opening statement that highlights the title of each previous film in the trilogy. After a set of attacks from militant humans, Caesar decides it's time to move his highly intelligent ape community from the forests and have them head off for a desert. In the meantime, Caesar goes off and tries to find the Colonel, played by Woody Harrelson, who leads the humans. Along the way, he finds a mute human who eventually gets the name of Nova, and Bad Ape, played by Steve Zahn. When Caesar finally comes face to face with the Colonel, though, he finds he is full of surprises as a significant battle, both physically and humanitarian speaking, begins. Okay, I'll tell you in advance, the pros of this movie will be an extremely long laundry list, and the cons are going to be very few. So first off, the motion capture work has been fine-tuned to the point that within moments of seeing the first apes in the film, I forgot that these are guys wearing the silliest costumes ever and having ping-pong-looking balls all over them. No, these legit look like apes, and they somehow got them to move and talk on film. Seriously, it will have to be one of the best years in recent memory for visual effects if this film isn't immediately the top choice to win all the awards for visual effects at the end of the year. I don't know how you top this. So to go along with that, Andy Serkis, Zahn, Judy Greer, and the other actors who do the motion capture, and I'll also mention 3 more key apes whose names you'll probably won't know, so I'll give them their due. Karen Knavel as Maurice the orangutan, Terry Notary as Rocket, a fellow chimpanzee, and Michael Adamthwaite as Luca, a gorilla. All of them do a wonderful job with the motion capture. It's also one of the most impressive film roles for Woody Harrelson. He's a dark, dark character who looks like a baddie right from what I'm sure will turn into an iconic moment in film to a great monologue he gives to Caesar toward the middle. Also good is Amaya Miller as Nova, whose dialogue-free performance is a tough chore, but she plays it very well. What's also great are the nods to the original series, like Nova's presence and a few other surprises that I won't spoil here. But another one of those nods is Michael Giacchino's score. There's some moments here that reflect the score of the original by Jerry Goldsmith, and there's moments that are fresh and vibrant and percussion heavy, but then there's also moments of light piano score that are nearly tear-jerking. He also has a terrific score for Spider-Man Homecoming, which coincidentally was released last week, so you get back-to-back fantastic Giacchino scores. What works really well here too is the ending. The last moments leave this trilogy in the best place possible. See, 20th Century Fox hasn't cemented its plans on whether or not there will be more Apes films set after this or not, but they leave it in a way where if we don't get any for a long, long time and another reboot comes eventually, this one is a great one that plants the seeds that will eventually lead to the Charlton Heston days of the original. But if they do more and they suck, we can ignore them for the same reason. On top of all of that, Reeves makes this the most cinematic of all the recent films. The landscapes look gorgeous. The camera placement is awe-inspiring, and there are moments and images that will stick with you long past the final fade to black. Now, if I do have any complaints, and I do have 2 of them, I can tell you that they don't drag the movie down enough to start taking points off. First off, there were a couple of brief dream sequences from Caesar that felt very unnecessary. They're supposed to motivate Caesar's actions, but they could have really been replaced with more moments between Caesar and his companions, or just cut out in general, but they wouldn't have lost anything. There's also a moment where the film kind of turns into a POW movie, and that's Prisoner of War if you're a millennial, and the film does drag for a moment or two, and gets a bit repetitive, but soon we get to that wonderfully evil monologue that explains why the Colonel is so ruthless and so devilish, and before I knew it, I had forgotten all about those draggy moments. There's also one thing I can say about this that might come off as a negative, but some might view it as a positive. I have no idea how often I'm going to rewatch this movie. There are moments of genuine evil from the humans, and the Colonel character, and the POW elements that for me personally don't always equal out to a movie I want to watch over and over again. Sure, there are moments of humor, mostly from Bad Ape, that bring levity and keep the movie from being a total slog of darkness and at times depressing material. And while the movie has war in the title and there aren't many battle scenes, you feel like you've been through a war by the end. I think I'll need another watch before I figure out if this was better than the original Planet of the Apes, and it might not be as rewatchable as Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, which is a very great film. War for the Planet of the Apes is perhaps the strongest entry in this trilogy, and also the darkest, and perfectly fits into the Apes saga, while still being a film that leaves a huge impression, especially on the emotional level. My rating is a 10 out of 10. So my goodness, we've gotten a lot of great movies here in the past few weeks. I had a review of Baby Driver last time. That's another good one to see. And Spider-Man Homecoming, which, as I said in the last time, has become my favorite Marvel Cinematic Universe film. So yeah, we've gotten a lot of great movies here in the past few weeks, and we've got Dunkirk coming up next week. Hopefully that'll be good. I'm hearing good things initially from some of the initial reports. I mentioned it last time that I was afraid that it might not be a very good movie, but we'll see. I think the reviews are going to come in early next week, so maybe on Monday if they're in, we'll talk about them. That's going to wrap it up here for today's edition of the Plagman Rules podcast. Just a couple of house cleaning things before we go. If you have any ideas that you would think would be great to bring up about the Plagman Rules podcast, you can just leave a comment here on YouTube. Also, I'm open to taking discussion points. If there's something in the news that I haven't talked about yet that you're like, hey, why don't you bring this up on the next podcast? You can go ahead and leave a comment there. Otherwise, I do have a Gmail account set up, and that's plagmanrulespodcast@gmail.com. That's PlagmanRules podcast@gmail.com. All right, well, we'll see what happens on Monday. We'll do the box office report. If anything else breaks over D23 that's worth mentioning, of course, we'll get to that. And yeah, we'll always keep an eye on any late breaking news over the weekend that we want to catch up on Monday. We'll get to that as well. Until then, this has been the Plagman Rules Podcast. We'll be back on Monday.